The rain had already soaked the hem of my best pants before I realized what had happened. I was standing just outside the glass doors of Sorrente's, clutching my little purse like it could explain my worth to the world, blinking up at the ornate lettering painted across the window. Inside, warm golden light danced against polished wood, laughter echoed between wine glasses, and the aroma of rosemary and garlic drifted outward every time the door opened. I'd been waiting for nearly 40 minutes. They said they'd meet me at the hostess stand. I told the young man behind the podium again, trying to keep my voice steady. He gave me a soft smile, the kind that's all pity and protocol. "Ma'am, I double-checked. The reservation for 4 was already seated. I'm sorry. Are you sure you're with the Morris party?" That was my son's last name, not mine. "I am," I said, not even sure why I felt the need to defend it. He frowned and looked behind him toward the dining area, then leaned in like he might offer me a secret. "They didn't mention anyone else." I could check again. "No," I waved it off. "Don't bother." The rain came harder. It trickled down the back of my neck. I had styled my hair that morning, wrapped it in pins to preserve the soft wave I liked best. Now the strands curled wildly at the ends, like they always did when humidity got involved. The worst part wasn't that I'd been left out. Not really. The worst part was that I knew I hadn't been forgotten. I saw them. Through the large glass window that separated me from warmth, from family, from dignity, they were there. My son, Emilio, was seated at a round table near the fireplace. His head was tilted toward a woman in a blood-red dress, Marissa, his wife. She was laughing, her hand casually resting on his arm. 2 other people I didn't recognize sat across from them, friends, clients. The 3rd glass of wine had already been poured. The 4th seat, mine, was never added. They'd gone in without me. They had chosen not to include me at all. I took a step back, from the door, and into the wet silence of the street. The sidewalk shimmered beneath my shoes, and I suddenly felt very old. Not in the way my knees sometimes complained when I got out of bed too fast. Not even in the way people looked past me in line at the grocery store. No, this was a different kind of old, an invisible kind. The kind where your presence no longer changes the shape of a room. For some reason, I still couldn't leave. I walked around to the side of the restaurant, found a narrow alleyway where deliveries came in, and stood beneath a small awning just out of the rain's full reach. I needed a moment to think. A few cars passed. A young woman on a bicycle swerved to avoid a puddle. A couple exited a neighboring bar, laughing with the kind of joy that belongs to the childless and the drunk. I took a breath. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. Emilio hadn't texted me. No check-in. No, "Are you close?" No, "Sorry, we had to start without you." I called him anyway. The phone rang 5 times before it went to voicemail. I ended the call. Then I did something strange, something quiet and instinctive. I walked across the street to a coffee shop I'd never noticed before. I sat at a corner table and ordered the smallest thing I could stomach, a chamomile tea with honey. My hands wrapped around the warm paper cup like it was a lifeline. I could still see the restaurant from there. Still see them, my family, through the flickering light of their table, raising glasses and toasting something I was never going to be a part of again. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but the ache didn't want to rise. It settled somewhere in my ribs instead, deep and stubborn. Instead, I opened the notes app on my phone and typed one sentence. It left me outside. I didn't know what else to do, so I just sat with that truth. Later that evening, when I got home, I pulled off my damp coat and draped it over the chair. The small house smelled like basil and lemon cleaner. I had tidied up that morning, expecting guests. I'd even baked my late husband's favorite almond cookies, just in case Emilio brought them by afterward. Foolish hope. The cookies sat untouched. I warmed one and sat by the window with it. I watched the water roll off the roof tiles. The quiet was thicker tonight. Heavier, somehow. Then, my phone buzzed on the side table. It was a message from Marissa. "Sorry if there was a miscommunication. We thought you said you weren't feeling up to it. Hope you got home okay." There was a smiley face at the end. A goddamn smiley face. I stared at the message. For a long time. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my browser and searched for something I hadn't thought about in years. Who owns Sorrente's Bistro in East Hills? It wasn't pettiness that moved me. It was preservation. It was the realization that if I didn't take back some piece of power, I would never feel whole again. I'd disappear under someone else's version of events. Just another old woman with memory issues who probably misunderstood. But I understood just fine. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of rage. Rage burns hot and quick. This was something else. Longer, colder. A stillness inside me that had finally decided it was done waiting for someone else to open the door. I woke up before the sun rose. My body moved without ceremony, slippers on, kettle whistling, a notebook pulled from the kitchen drawer. The house felt colder than usual, even with the heater running. Grief does that. It settles into the walls like frost. I sat at the kitchen table and opened a blank page. At the top, I wrote, Sorrente's owner inquiry. Then I underlined it twice. By 9 a.m., I was parked across the street from the restaurant. A thin mist hung in the air, giving the glass front a dreamlike blur. The sidewalk was still wet from last night's rain, and the air carried that metallic morning scent, the kind that smells like iron and new beginnings. The front door was propped open for delivery workers. Inside, chairs were stacked on tables, and a woman in an apron was mopping near the bar. She looked up as I stepped in, but didn't smile. She didn't need to. I'm here to speak to whoever's in charge, I said, voice calm and clear. Raphael should be in the back, she replied, pointing toward the swinging kitchen door. Raphael was the general manager. I remembered his name from the time Emilio and Marissa took me here for her birthday, 2 years ago. That was before the pandemic, before the silence began to grow between us. He came out with a clipboard in hand and an apron tied loosely around his waist. His beard was peppered gray, his eyebrows thick, his presence tired. Good morning, I said before he could speak. My name's Celia Morales. I'd like to ask about the ownership of this establishment. That caught his attention. He lowered the clipboard. You looking to make a reservation? He asked. No, I'm looking to make an offer. He led me to a corner booth, one that hadn't been cleaned yet. He waved someone over for coffee, then leaned forward, his hands folded. You serious? Dead serious. He studied me like I was a riddle. This place isn't cheap, he said finally. I didn't ask for cheap, I replied. I asked if it's available. Raphael scratched his beard. Why here? I could have lied, said I was a retired investor or looking to do something with my time, but I didn't feel like hiding anymore. Because yesterday I stood outside that window like a stranger to my own blood, I said. Because my name's been used to feed other people's ambitions, and I think it's time I used it for mine. He didn't blink. I continued. I know it's a franchise. I know you're one of 3 co-managers. I know there were rumors about one of the original investors pulling out. I also know your liquor license expires in 6 months, and there's a new tapas bar opening 2 blocks away. Now, he blinked. I do my homework, I said, sipping the coffee. The server had just sat down. He leaned back, a slow smile growing. You want to buy in? No, I said. I want to buy out. That afternoon I called Lucia Vargas. Lucia used to handle small business closings back when I worked part-time at the community bank. She had a gift for finding loopholes others missed. Celia, she said when she picked up. It's been years. Are you all right? I'm better than all right. I need your sharpest pen and a confidentiality clause. I laid it all out. What I knew, what I suspected, and what I wanted to do. Lucia didn't laugh. She didn't ask me if I was sure. She just said, tell me where to send the draft. By Thursday, I'd received the preliminary valuation. The co-investor, a tech consultant from Houston, was desperate to exit after a nasty divorce. Raphael confirmed the terms. He seemed oddly respectful now, like he knew something sacred was moving in the room. I asked Lucia to transfer the funds directly from the investment portfolio I'd never touched. The one my husband set up before his last surgery. He always said, it's there in case the world forgets what you gave it. I guess the world had. But I hadn't. Friday evening, I returned to Sorrente's, not to eat, just to watch. From across the street, I saw Emilio and Marissa again. Different clothes, same glow of entitlement. She wore a silk blouse the color of cream, and ordered something sparkling. He leaned over the table, like he had something impressive to say. I wondered if he'd mention me, his mother, the one who bought his first car. The one who sat at every graduation, every emergency room visit, every mom, I don't know what to do. But he didn't look toward the window. He never thought to. I stood in the dark for another minute before turning away, heading back home. And yet, for the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. Not satisfaction, not revenge, just control, that quiet kind of strength that settles deep in the chest and tells you, you're not waiting anymore, you're moving. By Saturday morning, the papers were ready. Lucia called just as I was spreading apricot jam on a slice of toasted pan sobao, her voice clipped and efficient. You've got 3 sign and initial lines and a blank at the bottom for power designation. We'll file it Monday, but you'll be the primary stakeholder effective immediately. I emailed everything. I hung up, wiped the butter from my fingertips, and stared at the blinking cursor on my old laptop. The files were there. Real, final. My thumb hovered over the trackpad. Click. There it was. The purchase agreement. The new management agreement. And a list of assets, staff schedules, and vendor contacts that now belonged at least in large part to me. I didn't smile. Not yet. My stomach felt tight, and not in a giddy way. Change at this age doesn't arrive like a trumpet, it arrives like a key clicking inside a long-locked door. I printed every page. Then I fetched my black rollerball pen from the kitchen drawer and signed the first document without hesitation. I only paused on the last page. A declaration that I understood my role, authority, and the impact of any future operational decisions. For a moment, I imagined what Amelia would say. You're overreacting, Mom. Why would you even want a restaurant? That's not your world. But none of those words held weight anymore. They were ghosts floating in a hallway I no longer walked. By late afternoon, I drove to Lucia's office with the documents sealed inside a folder marked in neat handwriting, Sorrente's transfer. Lucia greeted me at the front desk herself, wearing her usual navy suit and a pair of tortoiseshell glasses that made her look sharper than any courtroom attorney I'd ever known. She flipped through the pages, checking for missignatures or initials. At one point she paused, looked up over the rims of her glasses, and said softly, "I hope this brings you peace, Celia." I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my handbag and handed her a second envelope. "What's this?" "A copy of my will," I said. "Updated this morning." She took it gently and nodded. "Understood." I left her office and drove straight to the restaurant. Not to go inside, just to see it again, knowing now that its keys were only days from resting in my palm. It looked the same. Of course it did. The kind of places that serve osso buco with tableside flair don't tend to change much. But this time, I didn't feel small looking at it. I didn't feel like someone asking to be seated. I felt like someone about to rearrange the entire room. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the buildings, I sat on the balcony of my small home with a glass of wine in one hand and a notepad in the other. I was planning, not menus or staff rotations. I'd leave that to Raphael and his team. No, what I planned was far more personal. At the top of the page I wrote, "Band list." There was only one name on it. 2. Technically, if you count the woman who married my son and decided I was something to be managed instead of honored. The next day, Sunday, I attended Mass for the first time in over a year. Not out of guilt, not even out of ritual. I just wanted stillness in a room that didn't ask for explanations. Afterward, as I walked across the church parking lot, I passed Mrs. Alvarez and her daughter. "Celia," the older woman called. "I heard something wild. You didn't really buy Sorrente's, did you?" I tilted my head, kept walking, and said, "Tell me if the food improves, won't you?" Mrs. Alvarez burst out laughing. Her daughter looked confused. I kept walking. Monday arrived like any other, but this time, my life had a new signature across it. Lucia called to confirm. "It's done," she said. "You're now the primary stakeholder at 64%. Congratulations, Miss Morales." I thanked her and hung up. Then, I waited. It didn't take long. At 4:27 p.m., I received a text message from Emilio. "Mom, did you do something with Sorrentes? We heard something, but that can't be right." I stared at the screen. Not a greeting, not a question about my health or well-being, just suspicion wrapped in entitlement. I placed the phone face down and brewed coffee. 10 minutes later, another message arrived, this time from Marissa. "Celia, we're hearing from people that your name's all over the paperwork. Is that true?" "No. Hello." "No, how are you?" I didn't answer. Instead, I called Raphael. Hi, I said, this is Celia Morales. I'd like to schedule a private staff meeting for Wednesday evening. Just a few policy changes. Shouldn't take long. Understood, he said. Should I inform your family? I paused. No, I replied. Let them find out the way I did. Wednesday came with the kind of quiet clarity that only arrives when you've already made peace with the storm. I woke up at 5. Not from worry, but from habit. Years of early mornings to pack lunches, check bills, feed mouths that rarely said thank you. I didn't miss the labor, I missed the illusion that it mattered. I made coffee. Strong, no sugar. Sat in the kitchen, with the sunrise painting gold over my cracked tile countertops, and read the staff profiles Raphael had sent over. 17 employees, total. A mix of part-timers, students, single mothers, a former line cook from Havana who'd lost his restaurant during the pandemic. It made me think of my late husband, how much he loved Cuban food, and how he'd always say that real kitchens don't run on fame. They run on survival, sweat, and a good pantry. By 10 a.m., I had handwritten notes for the meeting. Not typed, not bullet-pointed, just me, my pen, and a stack of paper filled with things that mattered: wages, schedules, health benefits, respect. I may not know how to flambe a duck, but I know what it means to go home bone-tired with nobody left to thank you. At 4:45, I arrived through the back entrance of Sorrente's. It was quieter than usual. Raphael had cleared the floor for the meeting. No dinner rush tonight, just candles unlit, and tables still bare. The smell of lemon cleaner and distant bread clung to the air. Raphael met me at the kitchen door, sleeves rolled up, clipboard under one arm. They're all here, he said with a nod. Told them it was important. Some of them are nervous. I gave a faint smile. So am I. He held the door for me. Let's change that. The staff stood scattered around the dining room, leaning against walls or perched on bar stools, half expecting a corporate script. They were young, old, dark-skinned, fair-skinned, tired-eyed, bright-eyed, every shade of the real world crammed into one dining room. I stepped forward. I won't keep you long, I began. And I promise not to use any words I wouldn't say to my own family, at least the ones I still speak to. A couple of chuckles broke the air. My name is Celia Morales. As of Monday, I'm the majority owner of this restaurant. But I'm not here to change the food. I'm here to change the feeling. A woman near the pastry station shifted her stance, arms folding. You don't know me yet, I said, but I know a lot of you. Not by name, by the way you wipe down a table like someone's mother is coming to sit there, by the way you keep smiling even when the orders back up, by the fact that I used to be invisible to people like my son, but never to the people who refill water glasses without being asked. A man by the kitchen doorway crossed his arms, but he didn't look away. I don't care about margins as much as I care about people not going home dreading their next shift. I don't want you working doubles without breaks. I don't want your tips stolen, your names misspelled, your hours cut without notice. I held up my notebook. These are my promises, not goals, promises: paid sick leave, no unpaid training hours, 1 free meal per shift, and every Sunday, closed for rest, because you are not machines. Silence followed. Then one slow clap came from the bartender, then another from someone in the back. A few nodded, a few looked skeptical, but none walked out. I stepped back. This isn't just a restaurant anymore, I said. It's a place that fed strangers better than my own son fed the truth. And that makes it worth fighting for. Afterward, some approached quietly. A server named Tony shook my hand and said, "No one's ever spoken to us like that. Not even the last 3 owners." One of the dishwashers, Alina, asked if I'd ever owned a restaurant before. "No," I said, "but I've spent my life feeding people who didn't say thank you. This time, I want to make sure those who do the feeding are finally full." By the time I returned home, my phone was buzzing. Emilio again. "Mom, I need to know what's going on. We had a dinner scheduled there next week." Then, another. "Raphael won't return our calls. This is serious. Are you involved in something that's going to affect us legally?" I turned off the screen. For the first time, in months, I felt taller than my shadows. That night, I opened my old recipe box, the one with curling index cards stained with sofrito and adobo oil, and began planning a dish. Not for the restaurant, not for the staff. For me. A thank you. A remembrance. A meal with no audience, no obligation. Because even if no one else ever fed me again, I'd finally remembered how to feed myself. By Thursday morning, the messages stopped being polite. Emilio's latest read: I don't know what game you're playing, but locking us out of a reservation we made weeks ago isn't just petty, it's cruel. Marissa's parents are flying in. Fix it. I read it twice, then placed the phone down beside my tea. Cruel. They'd left me outside in the rain, without a seat, a name, or a moment's thought. But I was the cruel one now. That was how people like Marissa spun stories, quick with blame, loud with guilt. I used to bend under that kind of pressure. Not anymore. The reservation in question had been flagged earlier that week by Raphael. There's a party of 6, listed under Emilio Morris, he'd said, raising an eyebrow. Do we approve? I didn't hesitate. Decline. Send the cancellation notice. No reason? One line is enough, I'd told him. Reservation no longer valid under new management. Now, with silence thick in the air and his words echoing through my head, I leaned back and watched the steam curl from my mug like a whisper. I finally didn't need to explain. At noon, Raphael called. Just a heads up, he said. Emilio came by the front desk earlier, tried to make a scene. My throat tightened, not from fear, just the memory of him, as a boy, nose running, fingers clinging to my sweater on the first day of kindergarten. How did we get here? He said he's your son, Raphael continued. Asked to speak with you directly. I told him you weren't available and escorted him out calmly. Did he say anything else? He said you'd regret this, that you were ruining his family. I closed my eyes for a moment. Regret had once been the rhythm of my days. The things I hadn't said, the moments I let pass. But I had no space left for regret, not when my dignity finally had roots. Thank you for handling it, I said. And let the hostess know if anyone tries to use my name to book something, it goes through me. Understood. We hung up, and for a moment, I just sat there, letting the quiet remind me that I had every right to the life I was finally claiming. By late afternoon, I went to the restaurant, not to work, not to oversee anything, just to sit. I chose a window seat near the front, the one they'd laughed in front of while I stood alone on the sidewalk. The table had been polished to a sheen, silverware lined with mathematical precision. A young hostess approached me with a soft smile. She was Would you like a menu, ma'am? No, thank you. Just coffee. And maybe a moment. She nodded, and I watched her walk away, ponytail swinging, youth full of easy grace. I didn't envy her, but I wondered if anyone had taught her yet that invisibility has nothing to do with eyesight. It's what happens when people decide you're no longer part of the picture. When the coffee arrived, I held the warm ceramic in both hands and breathed in slowly. Across the street, traffic crawled. A father bent to tie his son's shoe. A woman passed with groceries in both arms. Life, unconcerned by family squabbles, kept going. I sipped my coffee and remembered the first time I brought Emilio to a restaurant. He was 8, wearing a clip-on tie that twisted sideways every time he turned his head. He had ordered spaghetti and spilled marinara on his lap. I'd laughed, gently dabbed the stain, told him, "You're not here to impress anyone, just to eat and be kind." What a simple rule, what a hard one to follow. At sunset, I walked into the kitchen. Raphael was plating sea bass with a line cook, while classical music played on a speaker tucked above the pantry door. You ever wonder how something so chaotic can still feel like art? He asked, without looking up. I smiled. You mean the restaurant or the family? He chuckled. Both. I watched him for a moment, then took a step closer. I want to add something to the wall, I said. He glanced up. A menu change? No. A sign. What kind? I pulled a folded piece of paper from my pocket, printed on it in bold, simple font. Respect is the minimum. Dignity is the standard. This house has no room for cruelty. Raphael took the page gently and nodded. We'll hang it by the bar. I touched the edge of the counter. Thank you. He looked up. You sure you're ready for the fallout? People talk. Let them, I said. I'm not hiding anymore. That evening, as I locked up and stepped outside into the quiet of early night, my phone buzzed once more. It was a voicemail this time. Emilio. His voice was tight, clipped. You win, okay? You made your point. I hope this power trip makes you feel better. You've embarrassed us. Then silence. No apology, no pause, just a wounded ego dressed up as concern. I pressed delete. And for the first time in a long while, I walked to my car without looking over my shoulder. Friday arrived with a strange lightness in the air, like the sky had exhaled overnight. The rain from earlier in the week had finally stopped, leaving behind a city washed clean. The streets looked brighter. Even the cracks in the pavement seemed less worn. I spent the morning watering my balcony plants, speaking softly to the basil that was starting to wilt and the little lemon tree my neighbor had given me last spring. The scent of damp soil, mixed with rosemary clippings, always brought me back to the garden my husband and I once kept back before the concrete, the silence, the forgetting. After breakfast, I sat down to write. Not in my notebook this time, but on proper stationery. The thick kind with embossed edges that made even a simple note feel like a declaration. I wrote 5 letters, each addressed to someone who had once mattered and drifted away. To my cousin Isla, who moved to Miami and stopped sending birthday cards. To my old friend Nora, who I hadn't seen since my husband's funeral. To Elena from the choir, who used to bring tamales every Christmas before her stroke. And finally, 2 more I didn't send. One to Emilio. One to myself. In Emilio's letter, I didn't explain what I had done or why. I simply told him that being left out of that dinner wasn't the only wound, it was just the one that bled last. And in my own letter, I wrote something I'd never dared say aloud. You were never the villain for wanting peace. You just forgot that peace doesn't mean silence. I folded the notes and placed them carefully in a drawer, not to be sent, but kept. Not every truth needs an audience. That evening, I returned to the restaurant. But this time, I made a reservation for one. Raphael raised an eyebrow when I arrived. Dining alone tonight? Celebrating, I said. He led me to a small table by the fireplace, one that usually stayed reserved for anniversary couples and favored regulars. I sat down and unfolded the linen napkin across my lap. The warmth from the flames brushed against my cheek, and for the first time in a long while, I felt fully present. A young waiter, Gabriel, brought a glass of Rioja and asked if I wanted recommendations. I waved him off with a smile. Surprise me. He did. 3 courses later, I was sitting in front of a chocolate torte that could have brought tears to any decent person's eyes. As I savored the first bite, I noticed a couple entering the restaurant, older, maybe mid-70s. The man had a cane, and the woman wore a pearl brooch that caught the candlelight as they passed. They walked slowly, but without shame. She looked around for a moment, then saw me, and smiled. It wasn't recognition. It wasn't politeness. It was acknowledgement. I nodded back, that small invisible exchange stronger than any toast. We were still here. After dinner, I walked the floor slowly, taking in the space, not as an owner, not as someone on a mission, but as a woman choosing where she stood. I stopped at the bar. Tony, the bartender, was wiping down a shaker. How's the new vibe treating you? I asked. He looked up and grinned. People are starting to notice. Had a couple from out of town say it felt real in here. Said they'd never been in a place that looked this nice and still felt human. I laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. He leaned in a little. Truth be told, you're doing something rare. What's that? You're turning a restaurant into a home, but without asking anyone to clean up your mess. I blinked, taken off guard, and then I placed my hand on the bar. Thank you, I said softly. That means more than you know. Later, as I stepped outside into the cool night air, the hostess caught up with me. Ma'am, Celia. Sorry, there was a call earlier for you. A woman. Didn't leave a name, but she said something odd. What did she say? She said, tell her I remember the blue dress. Then she hung up. My heart paused. The blue dress, my wedding dress, had been blue, not white. It was what I could afford back then. Sky blue, with lace sleeves, sewn by a seamstress who lived 2 blocks from my mother's house. I hadn't heard those words, the blue dress, in over 50 years. I swallowed, then nodded. Thank you. As I walked to my car, I looked up at the stars and thought of all the people who vanish from your life, only to resurface when your hands are finally steady again. I didn't know who had called or what they wanted, but I felt something settle in me. an invitation to remember the parts of myself that existed long before anyone asked me to shrink. When I reached home, I lit a candle on the kitchen table. Not for mourning, for illumination. I poured a small glass of amaretto and placed the candle beside it. Then I sat, no television, no noise, just me, the flame, and the understanding that this moment, this quiet room, was more sacred than any crowded celebration. A table for one, but not empty. Never empty again. I knew he'd come eventually. Emilio wasn't the kind to sit with discomfort. He'd never had to. Life padded itself around his needs, like a protective bubble, first by me, then by the women he dated, and eventually by Marissa, who curated their world like a Pinterest board of soft beige denial. But I didn't expect him, on a Sunday. The doorbell rang mid-morning. I was in my robe, coffee halfway finished, slippers soft against the floor tiles. When I peeked through the curtain and saw his car in the driveway, something inside me went still. He knocked again, sharper this time. I opened the door. He stood there, in a navy windbreaker, sunglasses perched on his head, despite the cloudy sky. His eyes looked puffy, like he hadn't slept. "Hi, Mom," he said, voice tight. "Emilio, can I come in?" I paused for a breath. "You may, but I won't be making coffee." He followed me, into the kitchen. I didn't offer him a seat, but he took one anyway, like he always did. "Look," he started, elbows on the table. "I know you're upset, and I probably deserve that. But what you're doing, it's over the top." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed. "Which part? Buying the restaurant you left me outside of? Or reclaiming a seat I was never offered?" He looked away, jaw flexing. "Marissa says you're turning this into a vendetta, that it's not healthy." My laugh came out sharp. "Healthy? Emilio, the only thing unhealthy was how long I stayed quiet. This isn't revenge, it's redirection." He tried to speak, but I raised a hand. "Do you remember your father's wake?" His eyes snapped to mine. "Of course I do." "You left early," I said. Said Marissa had a work thing, that her boss didn't believe in personal days. He swallowed hard. "And the dinner after?" "When I made arroz con pollo and pulled out the photo albums." "Mom, no. Let me say this." I stepped forward and placed both hands on the table, leaning in just enough that he couldn't pretend to look away. "You have made a habit of trimming me out of your life whenever I didn't fit the picture. I smiled through it for years. Do you know why?" He shook his head. "Because I thought I was doing it for you, for peace, for stability. But it was never that. It was erasure, slow and polite, but erasure all the same." His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "So this is payback?" "No, this is reclamation." Silence filled the room, thick and tight. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded like thunder. "I don't know what you want from me," he said, slumping slightly. "I don't want anything," I replied, softer now. "That's the difference. I'm not asking. I'm not begging. I'm living. And you're welcome to witness it, but not to dictate it." His mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "Marissa won't come, not after being banned." "That's her choice," I said. "Actions have consequences." "You've never talked like this before." "I've never been this woman before." He looked at me for a long time, really looked, as if for the first time he was seeing someone who didn't orbit him. Then, quietly, "Do you hate me?" I almost answered too quickly, but I gave it a breath. "No, I grieve you. There's a difference." That was when he finally looked small. Not just tired, small, as if some part of him realized what had truly been lost. "I'll go," he said, standing. I didn't stop him, but as he reached the door, I added, "The restaurant is hosting a community night next month. Free dinner for caregivers and hospitality workers. You're welcome to volunteer." He turned, stunned. "You'd let me after everything?" I met his eyes. "I don't believe in spite. I believe in boundaries, and redemption starts with service." He nodded, said nothing else, then walked out. The door clicked shut behind him, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. That afternoon, I drove to the restaurant. It was closed, as all Sundays now were, but I had asked Raphael to let me in. I wanted to walk the space alone. Inside, the light from the windows spilled across the polished floor like an invitation. I made my way to the bar, then slowly around the booths, touching the backs of chairs as I passed them. Every inch of this place had once belonged to people who thought I didn't belong. Now it was mine, not as a crown, as a home. I reached the table where they'd sat that night, the night I was left out front like an afterthought. I pulled out the chair and said, it didn't hurt the way I expected it to. In fact, I smiled, because I wasn't outside anymore. The morning after Emilio left, the sun rose behind thin silver clouds, as if the sky itself couldn't decide between hiding and showing up. I stood at the kitchen sink, drying the same mug I'd used the day before. The day before that, I wasn't thinking of my son's face as much as I was thinking of my own. Reflected lately in too many surfaces, something had shifted in me since our talk. It wasn't triumph, not even relief. It was clarity, the kind that comes when the dust settles, not from resolution, but from refusal. I had refused to be edited out. I rinsed my hands, tied back my gray-streaked hair, and stepped into the next phase of what I had promised myself when I bought the restaurant. It wasn't just about justice. It was about presence. If I wanted to give this space meaning beyond retaliation, I had to let it reflect more of me. So that morning, I didn't head straight to Sorrenti's for spreadsheets or inventory. I went to the Mercado. The open-air market had always been my favorite place, on Thursdays when I still worked part-time at the school. Not for the produce, though the tomatoes there could shame any supermarket, but for the rhythm. People moved with intention, but never haste. Time felt slower, more fragrant. I strolled past stalls bursting with lavender, sunflowers, chilies still glistening with morning dew. A woman was singing softly in Spanish behind her crates of oranges, her voice weaving through the noise like thread through cloth. When I found the stall I'd remembered, handmade ceramics, I paused. The owner was still there. Older now, a little more stooped, but still wearing his corduroy cap. "Señor Morales," I greeted. He squinted, then his eyes lit up. "Celia, Dios mío, it's been years. I need new pieces," I said, gesturing to his display. "For the restaurant." His brow lifted. "You're cooking again?" "No," I smiled, "but I'm feeding something." I picked out 7 mismatched plates, each one unique. None perfectly round, glazed in earthy tones, ochre, indigo, cracked white, like desert stone. He wrapped them carefully in newspaper, still drawn to the imperfect ones, and they remind me I'm allowed to take up space, even with my cracks. I returned to Sorrenti's before the lunch rush and found Raphael organizing produce deliveries in the back. "I want to do a soft reset," I told him. He tilted his head. "Define soft." "Rearrange the furniture. Just a little. Add color, less symmetry. Make it feel lived in, not curated." He gave me a curious smile. "You sure that's not a metaphor?" I shrugged. "Maybe it's both." We worked together in quiet rhythm, repositioning tables to face the windows, removing one overly ornate centerpiece that looked like it belonged in a museum, and bringing in small potted herbs for each table instead. By late afternoon, the space already felt different. Not louder, just warmer, less perfect, more honest. When Raphael stepped back and took it all in, he said, "It looks like someone's kitchen now. Someone who actually knows their guests." That's the point. I brought in the new plates and placed one at each table, a splash of soul against white linens, not to impress, to welcome. The next few days blurred into small miracles. An elderly man who'd never spoken more than a grunt asked to sit at the same table every week. A little girl drew pictures of the dessert cart on napkins and gave them to the waitstaff, like tips. Tony, the bartender, started leaving folded notes by the staff sink, encouragements. One simply read, "You matter," even on dish duty. And me? I started lingering a little longer in the dining room. Not to supervise, to witness. Because presence isn't just showing up, it's staying. One evening, just as the dinner rush slowed and the jazz gave way to something softer, I noticed the hostess guiding an older woman toward a corner table. She walked with the careful grace of someone who had known both elegance and grief. A deep plum shawl wrapped her shoulders, and her eyes scanned the room slowly, deliberately. When she saw me, her gaze lingered. Then she smiled. I stood, unsure why, but drawn by something I couldn't place. "Do I know you?" I asked gently. She nodded. 52 years ago, you wore a blue dress and danced like you didn't know you were being watched." My breath caught. "The phone call," I whispered. Yes, she said. I wasn't sure you'd remember. I remember everything. We sat. No plans, no performance, just two women who had once been girls in the same neighborhood, now sharing space again, as if no time had passed. She sipped wine, and I told her about the restaurant, about the night I was left on the sidewalk, about the purchase, the staff, the second life I hadn't known I needed. She listened, eyes bright. And when I finished, she placed her hand over mine. You didn't just buy a building, she said. You re-entered the world. I nodded, and for the first time I felt the weight of it, not as burden, but as proof. The restaurant was quieter that Tuesday night. It wasn't slow, every table had a guest, but the energy was different, more hushed. Conversations rose and fell like soft waves instead of crashing around the room. I noticed it as soon as I stepped in. Did someone cancel a large party? I asked Raphael as I passed the kitchen. He shook his head. No, actually, they just didn't show. There was a table set for 6 near the front window, fully dressed in silverware and folded napkins, but empty, untouched. They confirmed yesterday, he added, but no call, no word. I walked to the table slowly. Something about it felt off, not logistical, but emotional, like it wasn't just the food that had been declined, but the invitation itself. When I reached the table, I saw a single folded card next to one of the wine glasses. No name, just one word in handwriting I recognized immediately. Sorry. Emilio. I took the card, folded it into my palm, and stood there a moment. Maybe he had made the reservation again, trying to reclaim something without asking. Maybe he meant to come and couldn't bring himself to walk through the door. I didn't know. But for the first time, it didn't matter. Later that night, after the last guests had gone and the chairs were stacked, I sat in the empty booth across from that untouched table. The soft hum of the kitchen cleaning crew echoed from the back, and the warm glow of the sconces gave the room a quiet amber softness. I laid the card in front of me. Sorry, it said again, as if repetition would make it mean more. I traced the edge of the paper, then let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. When Raphael came by with his coat, he paused. You good? I looked up and nodded. You ever realize something too late, but still early enough to change what comes next? He smiled gently. Once or twice. I stood, folding the card again, this time smaller. I think it's time we honored the empty chair. He frowned slightly. Like a tribute. No, not a plaque. Just a night where no one sits there. A reminder that absence has weight. He nodded slowly. You sure that's not too sentimental? I'm sure it is, I said with a smirk. But so am I. The next morning, I arrived early. Before the deliveries. Before the prep. Just me and the quiet shell of a building that had become something sacred. I walked to the empty table, cleared the extra settings, and left only one chair. Then I placed a small rosemary sprig at the center, fresh from my garden. Not for mourning, for remembrance. Not of pain, but of patience. Because some things can only grow when given space. That night, the servers asked questions. Why the rosemary? What's with the empty spot? Raphael simply said, it's hers, let it be. And they did. Guests passed it, some curious, some silent. No one disturbed the seat. And somehow, that silence filled the room more than music could. I stepped outside, during the lull, between dinner and dessert, needing a moment of air. The evening breeze tugged at my shawl, and across the street, a woman waited at the bus stop, humming softly to herself. Life continued, unapologetic. I pulled my phone from my pocket and scrolled through old texts. I stopped at one from 3 years ago. Mom, can you send that rice pudding recipe again? Marissa says she wants to try it herself this time. Back then, I typed it out line by line, even the part where I added the cinnamon with my fingers instead of measuring spoons. I remembered hoping it would bring us closer. It hadn't. But I still had the message saved. Back inside, I walked past the empty table and noticed something someone had left behind. 2 sugar packets stacked neatly beside the rosemary. No note, no explanation. Just a small, quiet offering. Like a truce, whispered through a crack in the door. I didn't move them. I let them stay. Later, when the last guests had gone, Raphael found me in the back office, staring at the chalkboard wall we used to list events. We've got that caregiver night next week, he said. Still want to keep it open to the public? Yes. I replied. But I'd like to add something. He pulled out the chalk. Shoot. I stepped forward and wrote it myself, my hand steady. One table will always be kept empty. Not out of loss, but because some seats must be earned. Raphael read it, then nodded. That'll make some people think. I hope so, I said, turning toward the door. Thinking's a good start. Feeling comes next. The evening of our caregiver dinner arrived under a dusky lavender sky. I stood just inside the restaurant's threshold, hands folded loosely in front of me, watching the room swell with unfamiliar faces. These weren't the polished types who came for business lunches or anniversary desserts. They were quieter, warier, the kind of people who carried whole households on their shoulders while no one thought to ask if they were tired. Our hostess, Jasmine, moved through the doorway like a breeze, checking names off the guest list. Most came alone. Some arrived in pairs. There was one woman in scrubs, still wearing her ID badge. Another man in paint-stained jeans sat near the window and asked if he could bring a photo of his mother to rest on the table while he ate. She would have loved this place, he said softly. She passed last month. I'm still cooking her meals like she's gonna walk in. Of course, I told him, gently placing a rosemary sprig by the frame. You're both welcome tonight. The kitchen was already humming by 6. Raphael had outdone himself. No pomp, just comfort food made with reverence, stewed lentils with cumin and lime, roasted sweet potatoes with garlic aioli, and a dessert I'd asked for specifically, arroz con leche, served warm with a cinnamon stick standing upright like a flag of home. I sat near the center, not to observe from afar, but to participate. No clipboard, no directives, just a chair, a plate, and room to listen. Across from me was a woman named Ida, mid-60s, thin frame, thick glasses. She'd been caring for her husband through early-onset Alzheimer's for 5 years. He doesn't know my name anymore, she said. But he still turns toward my voice like it's music, she laughed. But her fingers twisted the edge of her napkin. You must be very strong, I said. No, she replied. I'm just what's left. I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine. What's left, I said, is often what holds everything together. Later, as the dessert was being served, I moved quietly to the corner where we'd left the empty table. I'd asked the staff not to place anything there tonight. No sugar packets, no rosemary, no name cards, just the chair, the plate, the untouched space. It stood out more than ever in a room so full. One of the younger servers, Miguel, hesitated as he passed with a tray. Should I bring water for that one? He asked, half joking. Leave it, I said. It's already full. He nodded, smiled faintly, and kept moving. As people lingered, slow to leave, I wandered among the tables, exchanging stories and names. I heard about a woman who took care of 3 brothers with muscular dystrophy, a retired teacher who now cared for her sister with advanced Parkinson's, a teenager who dropped out of college to care for her grandfather because no one else could handle his outbursts. Each one thanked me. Each time, I shook my head. I just opened a door. You walked through it. Some took photos of the room. Others asked if we'd do it again. One man left a napkin folded into the shape of a heart at the table's center and winked at me on his way out. You built a sanctuary, he said. Don't let them take it from you. I didn't need to ask who they were. We all knew, the ones who mistake silence for weakness, who rewrite memory to avoid discomfort, who leave people in the rain with practiced ease. After the last chair was pushed in, I returned to my seat and finished my dessert alone. The arroz con leche was slightly overcooked, just the way I liked it. Raphael came out from the kitchen and joined me, with a sigh. That was something else. You did good work, I said. So did you. We sat quietly for a few minutes. Then he turned to me. You ever think about writing this down? The story of how you got here? I looked around the room. Not the walls or furniture, but the space. The energy. I think I already am, I said. Every table, every night, it's another sentence. He nodded, then stood. Well, your story's got legs. Strong ones, I added, calloused and unbothered. As I left that night, I turned once more toward the empty table. I didn't cry, but I did pause long enough to remember, to feel. Because feeling, I'd come to learn, is an act of resistance. Especially when the world wants you numb. It was almost closing time when the knock came. Not at the front, where guests said their good nights and lingered by the glass door for one last photo. This came from the back alley entrance, where deliveries came in and cigarette breaks happened during tense kitchen hours. Raphael had already locked up the main dining area and was wiping the counters when he looked up at me. "You expecting someone?" "No," I said, already moving toward the rear corridor. The hallway was dark, except for the emergency light above the exit. My sandals padded softly across the tile. I hesitated before unlatching the deadbolt, a quiet internal voice urging caution, but not fear. When I opened the door, the cold met me like a slap, sharp, immediate, and so did the sight of her. Marissa. She looked different, not in the dramatic way, time transforms someone, but in the way life subtly rearranges your posture. Her once perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and she wore no makeup, only the faint redness around her eyes that said tears had visited her more than once today. "I shouldn't be here," she said quickly, voice trembling. "No," I said evenly, "you shouldn't." Her breath caught, and she looked down at her hands, fingers fumbling with the sleeve of her cardigan. But I didn't know where else to go. I waited. I was at my sister's. Emilio told me about the dinner last night, about the empty table. Her voice faltered again. "I came to say something, and I'll leave right after. I promise." I stepped aside. 2 minutes, I said. She followed me in, her eyes scanning the now dimmed restaurant. The tables had been cleared. The music was off. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and lemons. "This place looks different," she murmured. "I look different," I replied. "That tends to happen when you stop asking for space and start claiming it." We reached the center of the dining room. I didn't offer her a chair. "I came to apologize," she said. "Not just for that night, though God knows that was cruel, but for every time I made him choose convenience over connection. I think I didn't know what you meant to him, or what you gave up for him." I folded my arms. "I used to think you didn't like me," she continued, "and maybe you didn't, but I made it so easy to write you off. I made your absence comfortable, and I hate myself for that now." I didn't soften. "I raised him," I said, "and then I watched you help unraise him." Her face crumpled. "I deserve that. I'm not here to punish you," I said. "That's not what this place is for." She nodded. Her hands fell still. "He's not doing well, you know." I stayed silent. "He's been drinking more. Says he doesn't know where he belongs anymore." I looked around the room. Neither did I. For a long time. She took a deep breath. "I was wrong to try and shrink you, to treat you like a phase he'd outgrow. That's the danger of believing love is linear," I said, as if making room for someone new means evicting what came before. She nodded again, her eyes glinting with unshed tears. "You don't have to forgive me. I just wanted to say it. I don't forgive you," I said clearly. "But I acknowledge what it cost you to come here. That matters." She looked down again, and something about the curve of her shoulders made her look small. Finally, authentically small, not rehearsed. I walked toward the kitchen door, then paused and glanced back. "There's a rose con leche in the fridge," I said. "Help yourself before you go." She looked stunned. "I thank you. I didn't say it was for you," I said over my shoulder. "Take it to Emilio." After she left, I sat alone in my booth. No lights, no music, just me and the silence I had come to know as both wound and salve. I didn't cry, but I let my face relax into something softer than pride, something closer to grace. Because the table hadn't just stayed empty, it had made room. That Saturday morning, I opened the restaurant early, not to work, but to clean, not just the surfaces, not just the kitchen. I mean, really clean. The kind of cleaning you do when something inside you says, it's time to start again, but not from zero. The staff had the day off. I told them I needed solitude, and Raphael didn't question it. He just handed me the keys and said, "Leave the lights low, let the space breathe." So I did. I tied my hair into a loose braid, rolled up my sleeves, and started at the back. The pantry, the spice shelves, the drawers where ladles tangled like roots. I moved through each section like I was reading a book I'd once memorized but hadn't opened in years. Some things I kept, some I tossed. A few I simply turned to face a better direction. It felt more like ceremony than labor. When I reached the host station, I paused. That was where I'd stood the night I was left outside. The same counter where my name had been erased from the reservation log, the same floor where the wind had stung my calves and silence wrapped around my chest like a noose. But today, the space didn't hold me hostage. It held me up. There, taped to the side of the counter, was a photo someone had left, a Polaroid from caregiver night, a woman holding her father's hand, both smiling with their eyes more than their mouths. Underneath it was a sticky note with the words, "This place reminded us who we still are." I took it down, pressed the note to my heart, and whispered, "Me too." By midday, the windows fogged from my efforts, and I cracked one open to let the cool breeze in. The scent of lemon oil and roasted garlic lingered in the air, even though no one had cooked anything yet. I made myself a pot of coffee, sat at the end booth, the one nearest the corner, and brought out a folder I'd been avoiding. Legal papers, tax reports, the business plan I'd written in scribbles and half-thoughts in the weeks after I signed the deed. I had highlighted notes in the margins like "think about Tuesday lunch promos," and "local art display," and "jazz trio, not quartet, quartets get too loud." Back then, I thought ownership meant control. Now, I knew it meant stewardship. I was never going to be the kind of restaurateur who hosted wine tastings or wore designer aprons, but I was the kind who remembered people's names after one visit, the kind who noticed when a regular ordered something new, the kind who left a light on for whoever wandered back in. Just after 2, I unlocked the front door, not for customers but for someone who'd called earlier that week. Her name was Teresa, and she was the niece of Mrs. Leone, the woman who'd run a bakery next to my father's butcher shop back in the day. Teresa was looking for a small place to host a community knitting group for seniors who no longer drove at night. "We just need a few tables and some warm light," she said over the phone. "Somewhere that doesn't make us feel like we're being watched for how long we sit." I told her she'd found the right place. When she arrived, I walked her through the layout and offered a corner section by the window. "There's a plug there," I said. "If someone brings a radio or a heating pad." She laughed. "Oh, we'll bring both." As we spoke, I realized something I hadn't dared think before. This restaurant was no longer a monument to what was taken from me. It had become a canvas for what I was still becoming. After she left, I stood at the window and watched the late afternoon light fold over the sidewalk. A group of teenagers passed, laughing too loudly. A couple held hands in silence. Life spilled forward with no awareness of how much it had taught me. Then I noticed someone standing across the street. Emilio. He didn't move toward the door, he didn't wave, he just looked. He looked older, more still than I remembered. He had the posture of a man waiting for permission he didn't know how to ask for. I didn't go outside, but I did step into the front window, turned on the cafe lamp near the sill, and adjusted the rosemary sprig that always sat there now. Then I walked away. I didn't need him to see me forgive him. I needed him to see I wasn't waiting anymore. That night, I sat by the bar with Raphael as we closed. No guests, no music, just the soft ticking of the wall clock and the hum of the cooling system. "I think I want to add a community board," I said. "Over by the front." "Events?" he asked. "Events, memories, names, a place to leave something behind or pick something up." He smiled. "You really are building more than a restaurant." "No," I said. "I'm building what I needed when I was left outside." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he raised his glass of sparkling water. "To what we keep," he said. "And to what we change," I finished. The first anniversary of the restaurant's reopening arrived without fanfare, no banners, no promotional discounts. Just a day like any other, except for the weight of memory carried quietly beneath it. I unlocked the door just before sunrise. The streets were still empty, lit only by the amber glow of street lamps and the faint hue of morning threading through the horizon. I walked inside, flipped on the lights, and moved slowly, touching every table like I was greeting old friends. There, near the corner, was the empty table, still untouched, still sacred. It had never become a gimmick, never been turned into a story we told guests for entertainment. Instead, it remained a quiet piece of truth, an invitation to reflect, or perhaps to grieve. Even regulars never asked to sit there. They just glanced at it and adjusted their voices without knowing why. I carried a rosemary sprig from my coat pocket and placed it in a small ceramic bowl at the table's center. Then I pulled up the chair across from it and sat, just for a moment, facing the space I had once filled with hurt. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel proud, either. What I felt was stillness, like something had finally stopped echoing. At noon, the restaurant filled with its usual music, muffled laughter, clinking glasses, the low murmur of conversation that hummed like a lullaby. Raphael brought out a new soup he'd been perfecting, and the staff passed around samples, debating whether it needed more nutmeg or none at all. I watched from the bar with a small smile. Then, I saw her, Marissa. She stood just inside the front door, uncertain, scanning the room for someone to acknowledge her presence. This time, she didn't come with a sharp tongue or a rehearsed apology. She held a large container, wrapped in cloth, cradled in both arms like something precious. I walked over slowly. "You didn't call ahead," I said evenly. "I didn't know if I should come," she replied. "But I wanted to bring you something." I didn't respond, just looked at her. "It's my mother's empanadas," she said. "The ones I never made when you asked. I found her recipe last week. Been trying to get it right ever since." She held the container forward like an offering. "I'm not asking for anything," she added. "Just letting go of what I've carried." I took the cloth-covered dish and held it for a moment. "Thank you," I said. She nodded and turned to leave, but I stopped her with a gesture. "There's a new group that meets here on Thursdays," I said. "People trying to relearn who they are outside of grief." She hesitated. "You think I belong there?" "I think most of us do," I replied. Eventually, she gave me a small, tearful smile and left without another word. That evening, after closing, I placed her empanadas in the staff fridge and scribbled a note, "Try these tomorrow, be kind." Then I moved to the community board. Raphael and I had put up near the host stand. It had grown wild, filled with overlapping notes, photographs, thank you cards, recipes, and one pressed daisy pinned in the corner. I pinned something new beneath it, a photo of me outside the restaurant on that first night, alone, forgotten, cold. And next to it, a photo from caregiver night, me laughing with Ida, our heads tipped toward each other like we were mid-song. I labeled them simply, Before and Becoming. Later, I sat in the last booth and wrote in my notebook. Some places are built from blueprints. Others are built from wounds. This one came from silence, but it speaks now. It forgives, but it remembers. And that is enough. The pen scratched, quietly, the ink soft and final. Outside, it had started to rain.
Not the kind that lashes, the kind that heals.
I stayed a little longer, listening.